They brought Isla to the trading post on a flat cart, wrists bound, bare feet bloodied from days of walking behind the horses. Her dress, once white, was now little more than frayed cotton and prairie mud, the hem torn by thorns and shame. She was only 19, a preacher's daughter orphaned by fever and sold by an uncle who saw her as burden. The men gathered around like they did for oxen, measuring her weight with their eyes, laughing that she still had good teeth. "What's she worth?" one man shouted. "She ain't walked into a church lately." The sheriff smirked. "Bidding starts at $3, less than a steer." A few snorted. One tossed a coin for fun. But from the edge of the crowd, a tall Lakota man in a doeskin vest stepped forward. His name was Tenato, and no one noticed him until the silence hit. He held up $3 silver, not in jest, but in ceremony, then laid them gently at the sheriff's feet. "For her," he said. The sheriff laughed. "A savage buys a preacher's girl. Lord have mercy." But Tenato didn't flinch. He walked to the cart, loosened the rope at Isla's wrists, and without touching her hand, offered her water from his own pouch. The men jeered. "She'll run! She ain't worth 3 cents!" But Tenato didn't look at them. He looked only at Isla's feet, torn, red, shaking on splintered wood. "Come," he said gently. "Your steps are safe now." Isla followed because she had nothing left to lose, but in her mind, she repeated the price. $3, a sum so small it should have broken her, but instead, something about the way he said nothing else made her wonder if maybe it wasn't about the price at all. He didn't chain her, didn't pull her along, just walked slowly ahead, pausing when she limped. And when they reached the river outside town, he stopped, crouched by the edge, and pulled a cloth from his pouch. Isla watched him wet it, wring it, and then, without asking, kneel before her like a servant before royalty. She flinched, expecting pain, but his voice came low and steady. No woman should enter a new path with old blood on her steps. Then he touched the cloth to her heel, and for the first time since her father died, Isla began to cry, not from fear, but from the way his silence washed more than just her skin. That night, Isla sat by the fire in the circle of Tenato's camp, too stunned to sleep. She expected cages, or at least a bed prepared for use, but all he gave her was a folded blanket beside the fire and a wooden bowl of food, hot, seasoned, gently placed in her hands without a word. Around them, the forest whispered in moonlight, and Tenato sat with his back to her, sharpening a bone needle with such focus it was almost reverent. Isla hadn't spoken since he washed her feet. She didn't know what to call him, or what she was now. She'd always been someone's daughter, then someone's property, and now, what? A wife? A servant? A placeholder? Her skin still bore the dust of that auction block, but something inside her was shifting. She finally whispered, "Why didn't you—" He didn't turn. "Touch you?" She nodded, throat tight. "You paid for me." He looked at the fire. "I paid for your right to walk forward, that is all." The words hit harder than any grab could. Isla couldn't remember the last time someone left her body alone, long enough to speak to her soul. She curled her arms around her knees. "But the others, they'll think I'm yours." He nodded. "They already do, but I will not confirm their filth with proof." A breeze swept through the pine, and Isla shivered, partly from cold, partly from the weight of his restraint. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Tenato turned then, his eyes catching the light with a quiet power. "I want your feet to walk in a place where no man spits at your steps. I want your hands to heal by choice, not command." Isla blinked, the fire dancing in her tears. "You don't want a wife?" A faint smile tugged at his mouth, but not the kind that mocked. I want a life with meaning. If that path walks beside me, it will not be chained to me. Isla didn't answer. She just looked down at her clean feet, wrapped now in the softest cloth she'd ever touched. He had dried them with his own shirt, which now hung over a branch to warm. She'd been bought like cattle, but this man had treated her as sacred ground. She hadn't even told him her name. And yet, for the first time since her father died in the church pew with his Bible open, Isla felt like maybe the Lord hadn't abandoned her after all. Maybe he'd just been waiting downstream, in the hands of a man who knew how to kneel. 3 days passed, and Isla still didn't know how to breathe around Teneto. He moved through the world like a man carrying silence as armor, not shame. He never asked for help, never raised his voice, and never once crossed the thin circle of space she held between herself and any man. He taught her how to boil roots into tea, how to tie knots for drying meat, and how to walk barefoot without flinching. But the world outside their fire had not forgotten her. On the 4th morning, hoofbeats thundered down the ridge, and Isla saw dust rise like a threat. A group of riders approached, the same men from the auction, one of them her uncle's clerk. "There she is," one of them growled. "The girl sold for silver. We got a new buyer in Elmsworth who wants her back, claims she was a virgin." Teneto stood, calm but unblinking. "She is not yours." The man scoffed. "You paid pennies for stolen property. They say you defiled her. That makes her worth less." Isla stepped forward before she even thought. "He never touched me." The men stared. "Prove it," the clerk sneered. "Let the women check." Isla shook. "You want proof that he didn't do what every one of you would have?" They laughed, thinking shame would silence her. But Teneto stepped in front of her, not to shield her, but to speak for her dignity. "You ask for proof of restraint like it's weakness. In my people's way, the proof is not what we touch, but what we honor." He turned to Isla. "You decide who you speak to, or not." Isla swallowed. Her voice was thin but fierce. "I'm not going anywhere. I walked into this camp. I stay because I choose." The men spat in the dirt, muttered about savages and ruined property, and rode off, disappointed. Isla watched them go with shaking fists and a dry mouth. When the dust settled, she collapsed near the fire, her legs weak. Teneto brought water without a word. "You could have claimed me," she whispered. "No one would have doubted you." He sat across from her. "But you would have doubted you. That is not a burden I ever carry for a woman." Isla stared at him like he'd just rewritten the Bible. And in her heart, she began to believe that maybe being claimed was never the same as being chosen. Maybe this wasn't a prison. Maybe it was a place to begin. That evening, Isla found him by the creek, crouched low as he shaped a piece of wood into something careful and round. She sat across from him, without asking permission. They had long since stopped asking for space. It flowed between them like water. "Teneto," she said softly, "have you ever loved anyone?" He didn't flinch, didn't lift his eyes, but his hands paused. Then, slowly, he set the carving down. "Once." He stood and motioned for her to follow. They walked in silence for some time, until they came to a clearing deeper in the trees. There, marked only by a circle of river stones and a worn leather pouch, was a small grave. At its foot sat a weathered doll carved from the same wood he now carried. "Her name was Luma," he said quietly. "She died in spring." Isla didn't ask how. Some things lived better in silence. "Your daughter?" she guessed. He nodded. "Her mother bled after the birth. I held them both. One left fast, one left slow." His words were few, but they split something open in Isla's chest. She knelt before the grave and laid her palm on the earth. "Did you bury her alone?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "but I sang the songs she liked. Her mother used to hum while she wove baskets. The birds sang too. They knew." Isla felt her own tears fall, though they weren't for herself. "You didn't want another woman after?" she asked, almost ashamed. "Many offered, some for shelter, some for children, some for coin, but none asked if I still carried her songs." Isla understood that kind of quiet loyalty. Her own father had loved her mother so deeply that when she died, he never remarried. "You're the first man I've known who speaks more with silence than demands," he smiled gently. "Words are for trade, but presence is for truth." She looked down at her own hands, still healing from rope burns, still unsure of what to hold next. "And what if I don't know how to be touched anymore?" she whispered. He reached for her slowly, lifted a nearby leaf, and held it between them. "Then I will wait until your touch returns, even if it never does." The leaf trembled in his fingers like a heart between beats. Isla didn't take it, but she didn't step away either. She just sat with him as the wind passed through the trees, carrying a song neither of them sang aloud. Teneto was not a man who sought pity, but that night, as the fire crackled and the pine smoked gently into the stars, he unbuttoned his vest for the first time since Isla had met him. She had never seen him without it, always wrapped in the quiet armor of strength and distance. But now he shrugged it off, folded it with care, and set it beside her. His bare chest bore the shadows of old scars, some long and thin, others jagged like thunder across the skin. She gasped without meaning to. He didn't flinch. "These are not marks of war," he said. "They are the lessons I survived." He traced one along his ribs. "This one, when I returned too late to stop my brother's hanging." Another on his shoulder. "This, from when I let a man spit on me, so my sister could cross the road with dignity." Isla felt her throat tighten. "You never fought back?" He looked at her, a flicker of firelight in his dark eyes. "I fight every day, but not all battles ask for fists." She nodded slowly, understanding him more with every breath. "Do they still hurt?" He paused. "Only when I pretend they don't." Isla touched the edge of one scar, softly, like she was reading a line in a book too sacred to speak aloud. "You let me cry in front of you," she whispered. "And now you show me this. Why?" He turned to her, slow and deliberate. "Because shame only grows in secret, and I will not let you rot from what men tried to plant in you." Her lip trembled. "But I was sold. I was passed around like cattle. You saw them bidding." He nodded. "Yes, and I saw you not bow your head once." Isla swallowed. "That wasn't strength. That was numbness." "It was survival," he said firmly. "And now I offer you this. Not pity, not possession, but witness. I see you." No one had ever said that to her, not her uncle, not the men at the auction, not even her father, though he loved her in quiet ways. She stared at Teneto, at the bare truth of his chest, at the way his own pain made room for hers. And then, without speaking, she reached for his vest, not to give it back, but to place it gently over his scars, not to hide them, but to say, "I know now why you keep them warm, and I will help you carry what they meant." The next morning, Isla awoke before the sun, her hair tangled from sleep, her mind heavy with questions she didn't dare ask aloud. Teneto had gone hunting at first light, leaving behind a small wrapped bundle of dried berries and a carved comb. The second item stunned her more than the first. It was smooth, delicate, shaped from ash wood with care. She ran it through her hair slowly, then again, until it didn't hurt anymore. When he returned, she didn't speak at first. She helped skin the rabbit, clean the stones, boil water for tea. But when dusk settled and the meal was done, she sat beside him in the long quiet that had always lived between them. "You left this," she said, holding up the comb. "You remembered I flinched when you touched my hair." He didn't respond with words. He just nodded once, like it was nothing. But she knew it was not. "You gave me space, and still stayed." He met her gaze across the fire, steady. "You were never mine to reach, only yours to return." Her voice cracked. "I've been waiting," she whispered, "for someone like you. Or maybe just for the pain to stop." Teneto's eyes softened. "Pain is honest. It's the lies we tell ourselves about it that keep us chained." Isla swallowed, tears rising. "But I don't know who I am without it." He didn't move closer. Instead, he stirred the fire gently, then spoke in his quiet, even tone. "Then let me sit with her. The version of you that still aches. You don't need to change her. You don't even need to fix her. Just let her rest." Isla stared at him. This mountain of a man who had bathed her feet but never touched her shoulder, who had offered shelter without taking her name, who looked at her like a prayer no one ever dared say aloud. "You don't want to kiss me?" she asked suddenly, her heart pounding. He smiled, but it wasn't smug. It was the kind of smile that a man wears when he sees something sacred bloom. "I want to earn that moment so gently," he said, "that when it comes, it doesn't feel like taking." Isla looked down, breath shaking, unsure if she was crumbling or rising. And then, with trembling fingers, she reached for his hand. Not to pull, not to possess, but simply to touch. His hand closed over hers like the final word in a language she had always wanted to understand. Neither spoke. They just sat there, holding something neither one would name. Not yet. The summer heat came soft that day, melting the chill from the creek bed, and Isla found herself drawn to the river like it was calling something old inside her. She stepped into the water slowly, lifting her skirt above her knees, wincing as the cold wrapped her skin. The mud clung to her ankles, dried blood still crusted around old cuts, reminders of the wagon floor, the auction pen, the nights she hadn't cried because it wouldn't have changed anything. She knelt in the shallows, the water rushing gently past her calves, and let her skirt drop to soak. She didn't know if it was shame or surrender. Behind her, she heard him approaching, slow, steady steps on soft ground. She didn't turn. She just said, "I don't know how to feel clean again." Teneto didn't speak. He crouched beside her, cupped the cold river water in both hands, and poured it slowly over her ankles. The first pour startled her. She flinched, not from fear, but from the tenderness of it. The second pour made her chest tremble. The third made her cry. Not sob, just tears that fell like they'd been stored in her skin. Teneto took a soft cloth from his belt and dipped it in the water. He touched her ankle like one touches something sacred, not because it's pure, but because it's survived. His fingers were strong, but his movements were slow, reverent. He didn't look at her face. He didn't ask for anything. He simply tended to what the world had ignored. "They said you were too wild to be owned," she whispered. "Too dangerous to be housed." He wrung out the cloth gently, brushing away a smear of old dirt. "They weren't wrong," he said, "but not for the reasons they fear." "Then why?" she asked. "Because I know what not to touch, and I know what to hold only if it asks." She turned to him, finally, eyes wet. Why do you treat me like I matter when I've been treated like I don't? He looked up then, the sun catching the deep brown of his eyes. Because you do, whether or not you ever believe it. Isla's breath caught. The water around her legs felt warmer now, not because of the sun, but because her body had stopped bracing for pain. He finished cleaning her feet, stood slowly, and held out his hand. Not commanding, not even guiding, just offering. She took it. And as he helped her out of the river, she realized something radical. She hadn't asked for his help. She'd let him. And that was the beginning of everything. That morning, Isla found a folded linen dress on the stool beside the hearth. Not the fine silks of the auction block, nor the filthy rags she'd been traded in, but something clean, soft, and unadorned. White. Her hands trembled as she held it. She hadn't worn white since her wedding day, and that one had ended with her being sold before the cake was cut. Teneto wasn't in the cabin. She stepped outside and saw him a distance off, braiding long strands of rawhide in quiet focus. He didn't look up as she approached, and she understood. It wasn't avoidance, it was trust. He was giving her space to decide. She went back inside and changed slowly. The white linen hugged her in a way that didn't display or conceal. It simply fit. When she stepped back onto the porch, her feet bare, her hair loose, he was still braiding. The rope he made wasn't for binding. It looked ceremonial, woven with care. He looked up then, and his eyes told her everything his lips hadn't dared. "Is that for me?" she asked softly. He nodded. "It's for us. In my tribe, we braid 3 strands: past, pain, and choice. When they meet, they make something strong enough to hold." She walked toward him, slow but without hesitation. "I've never been held in a way that didn't feel like a prison." "Then this will never be used to tie," he said, "only to remind." He rose and held the braided rope between them. "Would you like to wear it?" Her throat caught. "Around my neck," he smiled. "Around your wrist. If you ever want it removed, you cut it yourself." She offered her right hand. "I've lived most of my life waiting for someone to take my voice," she whispered. "But you gave it back without ever asking for it first." His hands were warm as he tied the braid around her wrist. Not tight, just firm enough to feel real. She looked down at the knot. "What does it mean now?" He met her eyes. "That your story is still yours. But now, it has someone listening." She stepped closer. "And if I want to stay? Then you stay. And if I want to go? Then I'll braid you another to take with you." The breeze lifted a curl of her hair, and without thinking, he reached to tuck it behind her ear. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it. And for the first time since the day she was sold, Isla felt dressed in something no one could take from her. Her own choice. When Isla stepped into town again, it was as if time bent around her. The same dirt road, the same faces. But she was not the same woman who had been led barefoot past the saloon with a price pinned to her. She walked now with her chin lifted, barefoot by choice, wearing a simple white dress that fluttered gently in the breeze. And around her wrist, the braided rawhide, soft and firm as a vow. Teneto followed a few paces behind, not guarding her, not guiding her, just walking as a shadow of strength, calm as mountain wind. No one spoke at first, but they watched. The auctioneer's son, who'd mocked her trembling that day, he dropped his cup. The preacher's wife, who'd whispered behind her fan. She froze mid-sentence. The sheriff stepped forward, hand resting on his belt, his eyes flicking from Isla's wrist to Teneto's face. "You come back for something?" he asked, voice half cynical, half shaken. Isla's voice was steady. Just my name." A few murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. "You already got one," the blacksmith said, crossing his arms. "Or did the wild man rename you?" Teneto didn't move, didn't speak. It was Isla who answered. He never tried. That's how I knew I was safe. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. A woman stepped forward. Hannah, a girl Isla had once comforted when she scraped her knees. Now grown, Hannah looked at Isla not with pity, but awe. "You okay?" she asked. Isla smiled softly. "I'm not clean yet, but I'm free." The sheriff scowled. "You still got no place here." Teneto stepped forward then, not threatening, but unignorable. "She's not asking for a place," he said. "She already made one." Isla turned to the crowd, lifting her wrist. "I came back to show you. I was never what they sold. I was always more." She didn't wait for their approval. She turned and walked toward the chapel, the one she was supposed to have been married in before everything fell apart. She didn't stop at the door. She sat on the steps, breathed deep, and looked up at Teneto. "I didn't come back to belong," she said. "I came back to stand where they tried to break me." He lowered himself beside her, and together they sat beneath the judgment of the sky, unmoved by the stairs. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving her own survival wasn't a mistake. The town could keep whispering, but this time she would not be sold, silenced, or shamed. The wind softened at dusk, brushing through the cottonwoods as if even the earth had quieted for what was about to happen. In the small clearing behind the cabin, no altar, no crowd, no preacher, Isla sat on a woven mat with her back to Teneto. Her hair, long and loose from days of not being touched, now lay in his hands. She hadn't asked him to braid it. He hadn't announced it either. He had simply gathered it, thread by thread, like a man assembling something sacred from broken parts. Each movement was slow, deliberate, 3 strands woven again and again. "In my tribe," he said, voice soft behind her, "we braid hair in silence when words are too small, for mourning, for devotion, for truth." Isla closed her eyes. She could feel every touch, not just the pull of the braid, but the reverence in his fingertips. "You didn't try to kiss me," she whispered. "Not once." "You weren't something to win," he said. "You were something to witness." A tear slipped down her cheek, not from sorrow but from a strange, tender gratitude that felt too big to name. "You never claimed me," she said. "Not even after I gave you my ring." "Because you didn't give it to be owned," he replied. "You gave it to remind yourself you were worth more than gold." He tied the braid at the end with a single pine-colored thread. "I didn't know hair could feel holy," she said. "Everything can, if it's touched like it matters." Isla turned to face him then. "You didn't save me, Teneto." "No," he nodded. "I just waited where you'd feel safe enough to save yourself." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. No fanfare, no vows, just breath and truth and the silence between people who've earned it. "I thought I'd been bought," she said, "but I was only ever carried." He smiled. "You walked. I only walked beside you." The fire crackled behind them. The braid hung gently down her back, still warm from his hands. She looked up at the stars. "Do you think the girl I was would have recognized this version of me?" "She might not have believed you," he said, "but she would have wanted to." Isla nodded. She wasn't a bride, a widow, or a traded woman anymore. She was simply someone who had chosen to stay, not because she had no escape, but because this place, this quiet man, and this braid reminded her. She had always belonged to herself. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more soul-deep stories here on Echoes of the West. If someone had braided your hair like that, would you still feel broken or finally seen? Tell us in the comments. The Fateful